Israel's plans to attack Iran?
Well, this is the
Is this
$90 million question.
Is this guesswork at this point, Colonel?
No, well, it's not really guesswork. First of all, there are lists of all the things: power plants, water purification sites, as well as oil production facilities, is Iranian bases, particularly for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Remember, just as I pointed out that Hezbollah in Iran know pretty much where everything is in Israel, Israel knows where everything is in Iran. So this is the age of persistent surveillance. There is not much that you can do without being detected, especially if you have any sort of electronic or thermal signature. So there are a lot of places they can strike and do very serious harm. We have been preeminently concerned about the impact, obviously, on global markets of an attack on oil facilities, especially Karg Island. At the same time, we're also very concerned about any attempt to penetrate the mountain where, the Iranian nuclear facilities are located, because they're hundreds of feet beneath the surface. And most experts have concluded that the potential to penetrate hundreds of feet below the surface is not very good. You can go a certain distance, perhaps 100 feet, 200 feet, but much beyond that, it's very, very difficult. So there's a hope that will not happen. And then finally, hovering in the background, you have this fear of an Iranian nuclear capability, that they could rapidly transform their existing stocks of enriched uranium or plutonium into warheads, which I think is probably real at this point. If you didn't want Iran to, quote unquote, get the bomb, then you shouldn't have done what you've been doing for years, which is threatening and bullying and pushing Iran. So I think that's also in the background. But the bottom line is this, and this is what people in the United States really need to understand. In the South,
I have an idea for
Hamas is alive. Has it been damaged? Of course. Is it being annihilated? No. In the north, you have Hezbollah. Has it been damaged? Of course. Is it annihilated? Absolutely not. So effectively, the Israeli Defense Force has failed in those two areas. They haven't been able to bring those areas under control. Right now, if you turn on Israeli television, officers are talking about, we may go a kilometer or two, or maybe 3 or 4 kilometers into southern Lebanon, but we're not going to drive to the Litani River as we have in the past. We can't do it. So you've got something of a stalemate, which from the standpoint of Hezbollah and Hamas is a victory. For the Israelis, it's tantamount to defeat. And in the midst of this, you have the prime minister who has now stated publicly he will attack whatever he thinks should be attacked in Iran, regardless of what we want or do not want. And you'll remember that over the weekend, there was a piece, I think it was in the Washington Post, I could be wrong, it might have been in the New York Times, where the journalist asserted that Mr. Netanyahu might conceivably be looking for an off-ramp. In other words, a willingness to step back from the maximalist objectives, and therefore the next Israeli strike on Iran would not be everything that Israel has to offer. In fact, it would be scaled back. Well, since then, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, I don't know where this information came from, but that's absolutely false. And then, of course, we've had these leaks in the press where we've leaked deliberately, I guess, the discussions that we've had with the Iranians about asking them to exercise restraint. These things are completely damaging. So right now, I would say that both sides, Iran and Israel, have no interest in exercising much restraint. They may hold back behind the nuclear threshold, but everything else is fair game. And I think the Israelis will throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at Iran when the time comes. That's where we stand. And this is a last-ditch effort, Judge. Mr. Netanyahu doesn't have very many good cards to play. He's got thousands of American servicemen and women sitting on ships in the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean. We can't keep them there in perpetuity. The Navy is literally cannibalizing itself to continue to operate with some measure of effectiveness as it is. Our armed forces are not in particularly good shape. Our missile inventories are low. And remember, you got to go back into port in most cases to rearm. So when we get involved in anything, we have a fairly short burst of capability, go back and reload, and then return to the launch site at sea. These are things that Mr. Netanyahu knows. That's one of the reasons that the Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System was deployed to Israel. And people talk about the missiles, but the truth is that what is really important about the Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System is the radar. The radar is brilliant. It's probably unmatched anywhere in the world. It's one of the best things that we have ever produced. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you set that radar up in Washington, D.C. somewhere, and you point it towards the south, you can track a basketball at 500 feet above the ground in New Orleans. Think about that. That's the kind of resolution this radar provides. The reason I'm emphasizing that is that the missiles, we may exhaust the missiles that we've sent very quickly because you fire 2 or 3 missiles at every incoming target. But the radar is key because the radar can cue large numbers of systems all over Israel to focus on where the enemy is coming. And that's very, very important. So this radar is the crown jewel of what we have to offer right now in air and missile defense, and he's got it on the ground. The problem, of course, is the Iranians are aware of what I've just said, and it'll be a very lucrative target when the fighting begins.
You mentioned Netanyahu unloading everything but the kitchen sink. If it were to come the other way, if the Iranians were to unload everything but the kitchen sink, would Israel survive?
Israel is going to have a tough time. Let's be frank. I'm sure your other guests have told you similar things. The Iranians are capable of leveling large parts of Israel. There is no question about it. That's why it makes no sense from Mr. Netanyahu's standpoint to withhold anything from his attack on Iran, because he'll try to destroy as much as possible of Iran's capability to threaten and destroy him. It's only natural. I don't think he's going to be very successful, but we'll see. He has the advantage of our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, space-based and otherwise, and I think that will help enormously. But will it be enough to prevent the arrival of large numbers of hypersonic missiles and ballistic missiles on target in Israel? And that I can't answer, but I think it's going to be very difficult for Israel, regardless of what they do.
You were speaking not too long ago about the U.S. Leaking information. I can imagine leaking the accurate contents of communications with the Iranians is going to terminate their communications with us. But among the leaks, using their favorite place at which or to which to leak, the Washington Post, was this letter that supposedly was sent to Prime Minister Netanyahu that if he doesn't allow humanitarian aid into Gaza in 30 days, I don't know why 30 days, but 30 days, the United States will consider halting military supplies. 30 days and consider. It doesn't seem a very precise or threatening threat to me, but do you think it's realistic? Would the Biden administration ever say no to Netanyahu? Would they say, let food, water, medicine, and fuel in, or we'll stop sending you bullets, weapons, ammo, and spare parts?
The short answer is no. In fact, a good friend with a lot of years of experience inside the intelligence community said it very well to me. He said, when the time comes and Mr. Netanyahu wants something from the United States in the event of the next attack with Iran, he's not going to ask for anything. He will simply make demands, and we will meet those demands. I think we have to understand that this is very much a case of the tail wagging the dog. Here you have a nation of, at least when this began, of a little over 7 million Jewish Israelis plus another million Arabs that are living inside Israel's borders. I mean, the current borders, not including Gaza and the West Bank.
Right.
And we are a nation of what? 330, 340 million. And we are now hostage to whatever Mr. Netanyahu decides to do. Those are the facts. He's in control. He's been in control from the very beginning. And while he has control, I think he's going to use it, because there is no guarantee after the November election that he'll be able to do then what he's doing now. I know that a lot of people are saying, well, you know, President Trump will give him whatever he wants. But if I were Mr. Netanyahu, I'm not sure that I would buy that argument. I think I would probably act now. And that's his best bet of dragging us into something. And again, if you look at this terminal high altitude air defense system and its radar, the roughly 100 American soldiers that are part of this, a lot of people are treating this as some sort of tripwire. Well, the truth is we've already got tripwires. We have those things in Iraq and Syria. And when President Trump was in office, he wanted to get our soldiers out of those places precisely because we could not defend them in the event of a high-end conventional conflict, which is what we're looking at with Iran and Israel. The terminal high-altitude air defense is not necessarily a tripwire, but it does signal that we will probably lose soldiers on the ground in Israel, on Israeli soil, if this fight continues. His hope that will be enough to trigger all-out war between the United States and Iran. But I'm not sure that would necessarily happen.
Yet despite Israel's confidence in its military superiority, Iran's growing arsenal of advanced drones and missiles is becoming a critical factor in the equation. McGregor points to recent events, such as attacks on highly sensitive Israeli targets, including an assault on Netanyahu's residence and a strike on the dining room of elite Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, Special Forces. These incidents have demonstrated that Iran possesses both the technological capability and the willingness to strike